Craig stood before the bathroom mirror, scrutinizing his reflection, wrestling with whether he could keep his emotions in check, and after a brief pause, he succeeded in adopting the composed look he needed. This wasn't going to be easy. Leaning against the sink, he glanced down at the porcelain, noticing a faint ring of dirt around the drain and the dull, filmy chrome. The shine had long faded, a fitting metaphor, he thought with a sigh. He strained to hear the heavy footsteps in the hallway and the sound of the front door closing, but there was only silence. But if he stayed in the bathroom any longer, it would seem like he was hiding, and that wasn't an option. Stealing himself, Craig glanced back at the mirror once more, deciding his expression was close enough to what he needed. Then came the hardest part. He opened the door, and the faint creak of the hinge silenced the muffled voices coming from a nearby bedroom. Craig walked out, descended the stairs, and entered the kitchen, deliberately making noise. He retrieved 2 mugs from the cupboard, one plain white for himself and Ron's favorite clay mug. After turning on the coffee maker, he grabbed some hazelnut butter and milk. One way or another, it wouldn't take long. He made a few additional preparations, including a phone call, and preloaded a document onto his tablet in the living room. He was seated at the kitchen bar, sipping coffee, when Rooney appeared in the doorway, wearing a new blouse that highlighted her neckline and a pair of tight new jeans that accentuated her newly toned figure. She had even put on glasses, a rare sight since she usually wore contacts these days. Standing in the archway, she tucked a dyed blonde strand behind her ear, her expression one of submission. Craig gestured toward the coffee in her mug, indicating he wanted her to sit with him. With sad eyes and a slight shake of her head, she took a couple of steps forward and sat down. Rooney gazed into her mug, while Craig remained silent. After a few moments, she looked up at him, seemingly hoping he would speak first. He continued his silence, staring at her. "So what now?" she asked, straightening in her chair as she realized she had been slouching. "I think it's all over, isn't it?" Craig finally responded, his voice calm and steady. Rooney slowly closed her eyes and sighed. "I don't want it to end like this," she said softly. "I know," Craig murmured. "But after everything today, after everything you've done, I'm not even mad anymore, just exhausted." She stared down at her mug, her hands wrapped around it, feeling the warmth. Craig had even added her favorite cream. She could smell it. "It doesn't have to be the end," she whispered. "I guess I've been a fool." Craig gave a small snort of agreement but said nothing. Rooney glanced at him, her fingers nervously tapping the side of the mug. "Do you plan on staying?" Craig asked after a long pause. Rooney was caught off guard by the question. He had never spoken to her like that before, and it left her momentarily speechless. And before she could respond, Craig continued, "It's rhetorical." He nodded toward their bedroom. "After everything that's happened, no, Rooney sighed, trying to find the words to explain. "It didn't mean anything. I didn't feel anything for him. It was just physical." "I disagree," Craig said, taking a small sip of his coffee. Rooney reached out to touch his hand, but Craig pulled away sharply. "Don't touch me," he snapped. She froze, pulling her hand back, unsure of how to respond. "I don't want your tainted skin touching mine anymore," Craig said, barely keeping his emotions in check. Rooney sat in stunned silence, staring at him, hurt and confused. How could this man, her patient, loving, intelligent husband, reject her like this? He had never spoken to her so harshly before. She thought he liked the changes she had made. "I never should have agreed to this," Craig muttered, his eyes scanning her figure, the part of her visible above the bar. "That's when everything went wrong. We did this to help me feel better," Rooney reminded him. "Yeah, it all started there," Craig replied, his voice laced with anger. Though he tried to maintain composure, his tone wavered. Liposuction, facelifts, breast augmentations, dental surgeries, then a second breast job to make them even bigger, followed by a nose job. All of it. "Sure, it started with you wanting to feel better." Rooney tried to defend herself, but Craig interrupted. "After that first breast surgery, it became all about making yourself as sexy as possible." Rooney suddenly stood, knocking over a stool. "And what's wrong with that?" she demanded. "I was never sexy." Craig opened his mouth to respond, but Rooney kept going, a mix of guilt, defensiveness, and fear fueling her words. "I was always just plain old Veronica," she said bitterly. "Average Veronica. No one ever noticed me. Sure, I was smart, I did well in school, but no one wanted me. No one desired me. It destroyed me. So yeah, when I had the chance, I changed it." Craig snorted. "Now I'm sexy. Men want me," she said, jabbing a finger in Craig's direction. "I have big breasts, a nice butt, my nose is fixed. People notice me now. You just can't handle it." Craig smirked at his wife, but Rooney remained unfazed. "Your fragile ego just can't handle that I took control of my life, made myself desirable to men, and you saw that as a threat," she accused, her voice growing louder. "You can't deal with the fact that you're married to this," Rooney added, running her hands along her breasts, a waist and hips as far as her hands could reach. Then she lifted her hands, running them through her long blonde hair, pushing her chest out and swaying her hips, a move she had perfected. "You're small," Rooney spat, striking a new pose, "and you can't handle who I've become. You'd rather I stayed plain Veronica, living in a small house, driving our old cars and just existing." Rooney snarled, feeling more in control with each word. "Well, I got my breasts done, and I didn't stop there," she justified. "I had the fat sucked out of my waist and got a bonus for it. They fixed my nose and I landed new clients. The sexier I got, the more I gained." Rooney placed her hands on her hips, staring firmly at Craig. He returned her gaze, unflinching. "You men are so simple," Rooney sneered. "You think with the wrong head, and I use that to my advantage. See these breasts?" Rooney leaned forward again. "These breasts you used to love got me a $5,000 bonus, and they'll bring in even more." She grabbed a lock of her hair. "These hair extensions. Remember when I had black hair?" Rooney pointed at the blonde strands. "Men respond to blondes. I did this and suddenly men started glancing my way." She turned, sticking out her rear in Craig's direction. "And this? Men practically trip over themselves trying to get a better look when I walk by." Rooney faced Craig, her unimpressed husband, gesturing to herself. "Thanks to all of this, I landed the regional manager in the bedroom. And I'll get the next promotion too, Craig. All of this is an investment, you idiot. An investment in me, in us, in our future. Of course, I take advantage of how stupid men can be. I got tired of being ignored, of being overlooked. If you can't handle it, leave. If you can, then accept it." "Leave?" Craig asked calmly, his tone even, a slight smile on his lips. "If you're too weak to handle this, then yes, get out," Rooney shouted. "When you come back, maybe I'll give you another chance, but you'll need to change your attitude." "No," Craig said, taking a sip of his coffee. "No," Rooney shouted in disbelief. "No," Craig confirmed. Rooney approached the bar, leaning on it, trying to intimidate him. "If you're staying, then you better get with the program, jerk. I'm not putting up with this crap anymore. Seriously, Craig, if you can't deal with it, leave." "No," Craig said again, his voice steady. "You're a pathetic piece of trash," Rooney spat. Finally, Craig responded, "This is how it works. This is what I do." "Still no," Craig said, sipping his coffee again. Rooney's eyes widened, and a bit of foam appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Go to hell with your no," she spat at him. "You know I'm right. I'm going upstairs to have sex with that guy in our bedroom until I pass out. He'll promote me again, and I'll make an extra $15,000 a year, get more clients, and earn more bonuses." Craig shook his head, pretending not to care anymore. The truth was, he had been heartbroken at the beginning of the conversation, but now he was determined. "You can't stop me," Craig, Rooney fumed, furious at his CPUs, at his weigance. "If you want to stay with me, you better learn how things will be from now on." "No, I don't want to be with you anymore," Craig said, setting down his mug. "From now on, it's over." "I have something to say about that," Rooney snapped. "Not quite," Craig said confidently. "Let me prove something to you." He took a deep breath and suddenly shouted, "Hey, you in my bedroom, Vice President, you're trespassing. Get out of my house." "He's not leaving." Rooney jabbed her finger at Craig. "Oh, he's definitely leaving," Craig said, resting his elbows back on the counter. "Stay where you are, Eric," Rooney yelled toward the bedroom. Craig calmly picked up his mug again, holding it with both hands. Rooney stared at him for a few moments, struggling to process what had just happened. After a few deep breaths, her thoughts began to settle. "Craig, it shouldn't be like this," she said angrily. "I know," Craig replied. "I know I've been wronged, and I know it hurts. I wish you didn't have to see this," Rooney gestured vaguely toward the bedroom, "but this is what I need to move up. Men respond to sex, you know that." Craig nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in her words, though his expression revealed his discomfort. "I feel good now," Rooney continued. "I'm not invisible anymore. If I can feel better about myself and succeed, then why shouldn't I do it?" "Probably because you're my wife," Craig said simply. "I'm still your wife," Rooney snapped back. "I don't feel anything for that guy, he's just a means to an end." "No, that's not it," Craig said, shaking his head. "But I'm done being patient with you. I understand what you mean about being overlooked. I'm not an extraordinary person. I'm average," Craig admitted. "And sometimes, yeah, that hurts." Rooney folded her arms across her chest, waiting for him to continue. "I paid for the first liposuction. I paid for the second one. I paid for those breasts, the haircut, and even that butt enhancement." Craig gestured at Rooney's body. "I paid for all of this because I loved you and believed in you. And even when you started changing after the first breast surgery, I kept quiet because it was a big deal for you. I knew things were shifting, and you were getting what you thought you needed, but my mistake was being patient with you." Craig looked thoughtful. You became ugly, Rooney. Rooney scoffed mockingly. It started when you made those mean comments about your sister at Thanksgiving, Craig said. They were unnecessary. She looks a lot like you used to. You didn't have to treat her that way. And then when your mom tried to talk to you, you shut her down. Sure, you didn't go after your sister again, but you ignored her and you never apologized. That's her problem, Rooney declared. No, it's a family problem, Craig dared to argue. You hurt your sister, you hurt your parents, and you kept hurting them. Have you noticed they barely talk to you anymore? Your brother, when he talks to me, uses some pretty colorful words to describe you. I stopped defending you a long time ago. Rooney waved him off. That was around the time you started teasing me in bed about your enhancements, Craig continued. At first it was playful, but after a while it stopped being teasing, didn't it? Craig gave her a pointed look. You started to convince yourself that you were better than me, and you enjoyed humiliating me. Only in the bedroom, but it was there. So what? Rooney smirked. And then you turned on your old friends. Craig thought back to Jules. You were terrible to her. She was your maid of honor, remember? Rooney just shrugged. Who cares if she can't see what's right in front of her? Well, she did see it, Craig responded. That's why she's no longer your friend. Rooney closed her eyes, took a deep breath in frustration, raised her eyebrows, and then let them fall, waiting for Craig to continue. You were getting worse and worse, Craig said, moving further away from the Veronica he had once loved. She wasn't a model or anything, but she was kind, fun, smart, a bit insecure in an adorable way, compassionate, couldn't cook to save her life, but she was my best friend. Rooney looked at Craig with concern on her face. And you? Craig gestured toward her. You're just a cruel, plastic doll now. One I don't like anymore and won't put up with. Then get the hell out, Rooney spat, pointing at the door. No, Craig replied simply. Suddenly there was a knock from the far end of the house. Sorry, Craig said, standing up and leaving the room. Now what? Rooney muttered, rolling her eyes at the sound. The doorbell rang, and she heard Craig shout. Coming, Rooney leaned back to see who was at the door as Craig opened it. He greeted two uniformed officers, a man and a woman. Come in, Craig invited as the cautious officers stepped inside. The woman officer glanced at Rooney through the kitchen doorway. So she asked. Yes, thanks for coming, Craig replied, pulling out his wallet and handing his driver's license to the male officer. Here's my ID. I'm the sole owner of this house, and there's an intruder upstairs in the bedroom. I also need help removing this woman from the premises, Craig said, nodding toward Rooney. Craig, Rooney yelled, walking toward him. Is the person upstairs armed? The female officer asked. What's going on? Rooney shouted, trying to take control of the situation. Officers, it's not true, Rooney protested. Hold on, Craig said, stepping past the officers and picking up his tablet from the coffee table. He turned it on, muttering, one moment before handing the device to the male officer. What's this? The officer asked, glancing at the document. After reviewing it and checking Craig's ID, handed the tablet back. All right, you're the owner. What's happening here? The officer asked. I came home and found my wife with her boss in our bed. They were engaged in inappropriate acts, Craig explained. I told the man he was trespassing, but he's still here. I want him removed and I want to press charges. Craig, Rooney exclaimed angrily, looking a bit nervous. She didn't like where things were heading, feeling like it was spiraling out of her control. I invited him, Rooney yelled, glaring at Craig. He's not trespassing. Ma'am, the female officer said, trying not to focus on Rooney's revealing attire. Under the city's new laws, if a family member claims someone is trespassing on private property, they have to leave. Did you let him know he wasn't welcome? The female officer asked. Yes, Craig replied. I yelled it from the stairs. I didn't confront him directly, but I have it recorded. He tapped his chest pocket, indicating his phone. Craig, Rooney hissed. And I want her out too, Craig added, nodding toward Rooney. I don't want her arrested, just escorted out. Was there any violence involved? The female officer asked, while her partner spoke into his radio. She looked directly at Rooney. What? No. I didn't touch him, Rooney said, pointing at Craig. I meant, did he hit you? The officer clarified, but quickly assumed there was no violence involved. "Sir, can you show me where the bedroom is?" the male officer asked. "My partner will stay here with her." Of course, Craig responded, walking past Rooney and the officer. "Ma'am, stay here with me," the female officer requested. Rooney watched as Craig led the officer upstairs, feeling like everything was slipping out of her control. "This is all wrong," she muttered. "I'm sure it feels that way," the officer responded. About 10 minutes later, the male officer returned, descending the stairs with 2 others behind him. Leading the way was Rooney's boss, wearing only suit pants with his fly and belt undone. His chest was bare, his hair disheveled, and his angry eyes told the story of his humiliation. He glared at Rooney as he passed, heading for the door. The male officer followed, holding his boss's jacket, shirt, tie, and shoes, along with socks tucked inside. His other hand was gripping the boss by the handcuffs behind his back. As they passed, the male officer nodded to his partner. "I'll let her gather her things," the female officer said to her partner. Craig stood on the side, watching everything play out. "Craig, don't do this," Rooney pleaded, finally realizing what was happening. "It's already done," Craig said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I don't feel safe with you here anymore. You bring strangers into our home when I'm not around and keep it hidden from me. Your behavior has changed so much lately. You need to go. Take your clothes and whatever you need. We'll settle everything with the lawyers later." He added, mostly for the officer's sake, in case a witness was needed for court. "Craig," no, Rooney begged, reaching out to him. "We can fix this." "We've been trying to fix it for a long time," Craig replied, closing his eyes as painful memories washed over him. "It didn't work. It's over." "Sir, can she take some of her belongings?" the female officer asked, while Rooney stood in stunned silence as reality sank in. "Of course," Craig said. "Her car's in the garage, the new BMW, not the old Subaru. She can take that." Nodding, the officer turned to Rooney. "Come on, sweetie, let's get your things." As Rooney and the officer headed upstairs, Craig took out his phone and stopped the recording. He wasn't sure how clear the video quality would be, but the audio would be fine. He uploaded the recording, sent copies to his lawyer, Rooney's family, and his own family. It didn't take long. He had asked his lawyer to notify Rooney's employer, but the lawyer advised him to wait, as it was better if she stayed employed in case a divorce was imminent like now. "Craig, we can still work this out," Rooney said, coming down the stairs and seeing her soon-to-be ex-husband. "I've already tried," Craig said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I spoke to you about how you were acting. I tried for months. At first you listened. Then you stopped. And a few weeks ago, after I saw you with your boss at the company party, I stopped trying too. These last couple of weeks I've been reflecting on everything." "Craig, please," Rooney pleaded. "I've already said this to you," Craig responded softly. "Do you remember how many times?" "Come on," the female officer said, holding one of Rooney's suitcases. Rooney grabbed the handle of her suitcase, looking lost, and followed the officer toward the garage. Craig stood still, waiting. It didn't feel like it was completely over yet. But when he heard the garage door open, the BMW pull out, and the door close, he finally exhaled, feeling a bit of the tension leave his body. He collapsed onto the couch, letting out a heavy sigh, and then cried for his wife, hoping one day she could free herself from what she had become. The coffee sitting on the kitchen bar had long gone cold. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of Cheating Stories. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.